I didn't say anything.
And let's keep the meeting short tonight. I gotta fly to Texas in the morning.
I
thought you were gonna say it was.
Unless you wanted to walk.
No, it's completely self-inflicted, so it's different than realizing it's flesh.
We were talking about the school.
That's
I know,
probably
I mean,
punishment enough.
Yeah, Texas ball places too.
Okay, so it sounds like good timing, I thought you were trying to set something.
I just listened to him. I was proud of myself.
Huh?
Are we all here?
So,
Need to be here? We're not waiting
But I
on
didn't
you
like it.
this meeting.
you ready?
Yeah, so let's get started with our town board work session meeting. I know we've got lots of stuff to cover and we've gotta be upstairs at 7 PM. So, we've got everybody that we need to. And so we'll start our work session this evening, with Katie Press and Stacy Johnson giving us, feedback on the retail study analysis.
So I just want to kick this off by over the weekend, yesterday, in fact, I was in St. Louis for the wedding. And, St. Louis Business, read an actual newspaper, had to go to the hotel to find a
Old school.
newspaper, yeah. But, Reuters, the pall over US Falls. Shopping center investors brace for losses that could be in billions as booming online sales deepen retail quota. So, I thought that was very appropriate. When I read it in my packet, I
I was
said,
gonna wait for you to like
Yeah.
sideswipe me with something.
yeah, but,
It's not surprising.
you know, I think, just, we need to keep in front of us, not everything we're talking about, but the one item that I've been on for several years, as Katie knows, is the e-commerce Fairness Act. I don't know, in today's Colorado retail municipal world, and our financing structure, what the sustainability of how we collect taxes is going to be for the long term, particularly if we do not share, if sales tax continues to be our course. So I just thought if you wanna read it, it's good. It talks about the billions of dollars due soon, coming due by mall investors, that don't have it. And what could happen to malls as those billions come due soon, over the next 10 years. So, anyway, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Stacy and talk about where we go, but it was just kind of an interesting story, so.
Okay, so if you remember, for about the last year, we've been working on this retail analysis, and we've had 3 phases. We've always kind of come at this retail study with 3 phases in mind. So the first phase was Ricker Cunningham to produce this report. We've seen that report. The second phase that you guys have approved is Katie to really analyze that report and see, what does that data mean, and does it fit within our locations in Windsor, from that standpoint. What's unique about this report, and I think what has shifted much to what Kelly was getting at, was the fact that now it's a whole new environment out there. This whole, even over the shift, and we knew it was coming, so it's just this whole shift has now come not only about, what retailers can we get retailers, and what does that retail environment look like. So Katie's gonna talk a little bit about her report, which was in your packet, and then we'll go through and just have a discussion about how we wanna proceed and move forward with our plan of attack for retail.
So I'm gonna move pretty quickly because I know time's limited. Hopefully you guys all had a chance to at least get your hands on this and start looking at this. So I'm just gonna do some recapping and expand a little bit on some of the concepts that were talked about in here. So now that we have the data, what does it mean? I think it's important to understand that data is just data. In and of itself, it doesn't take into the factors that actually influence the marketplace and can influence what the data actually produces. The other thing is the data did not include influences from things like online sales. So when we look at demand and we look at supply and we're trying to quantify it by square footage, there are still a number of unknowns in the marketplace that really make it not the end-all be-all, and that we need to really kind of delve much further into trends in the industry and things that are impacting retail as a whole to really understand what our capacity and our ability to meet that capacity really means. And ultimately, that's what we started from. When we started this process, gosh, almost a year ago, not quite, but almost a year ago, it was to try and understand what the capacity of retailing was within the town of Windsor, not only today, but into the future. And so you're gonna find as I talk through this evening, there's some shifting in that perspective because there are factors in play in retailing that make it, that make in some ways the Ricker Cunningham data and the data that you have reviewed maybe not as relevant. Because when we take retail trends that are in front of us, you're gonna see that maybe even though there are areas within the town that say that can support some substantial retail, there's impacts in retailing that are gonna make that maybe not true. So I'm gonna first spend some time on what's trending in retail. And I think you're gonna see, I think I might have used it more than once, the idea of seismic shifting and shifting sands. That's gonna be a constant theme that's really going on with retail. One of the predominant factors is we're starting to see the non-materialistic consumer. Study after study, chart after chart, all talks about the things that we're moving away from things. That's mine. I apologize profusely.
Tell them Windsor's interested.
Yeah. Thought I turned that off. This was once really only attributable to millennials. This is now becoming a generational perspective. This is not just millennials. All of us as consumers are starting to move away from things. And you'll see in the report that I gave you that the number one, the top 3 or 4 items that people are spending their expendable income on are like dining out, short-term vacations, long-term vacations. It isn't until you get much deeper into that chart and into the mid-range where you start to see consumers spending money on the more traditional things that we talk about. So the biggest question is as is the case in a lot of things in the industry, is this a priority shift in expendable dollars lasting? Are we permanently changed in that capacity? Are we going to get tired of going on trips and really want to go back and buy things again? That's something that nobody's crystal ball can predict. And you'll find that everybody is very very reactive to the predictive indicators right now, which is that if we're shifting away, then we're going to see dollars spent that direction. And I think it's important as we talk about these trends, this is not something that's a trend just for Windsor. This is a trend for retail across the board. It's from California to the East Coast. It's hitting every generation, and it's hitting every municipality and every state. So it's not something that's just happening in the town of Windsor. I thought the cartoon was fun. I always thought you couldn't buy it, and now we're saying that maybe you can. So the non-materialistic consumer is changing. Let me back up. These are all individually interrelate to each other. So changing the way we shop. Consumer base is more conservative with spending. People are not as quick to open their wallets as they once were. There's a broadening of online shopping, as Kelly has told you. Online shopping is getting much more common. 80% of the entire U.S. population has made an online purchase. That's a pretty phenomenal number when we think about it. I will tell you that there are some factors that are indicating that where the market actually shifted one direction and there was a lot of impact from online shopping, some of that is starting to bounce back. Books is kind of an interesting perspective if you take a look at that. Amazon is actually experimenting with bricks and mortar bookstores because they're finding that at the beginning everybody was really cool to read on a Kindle or read on a computer, and people started to not like that so much, and they really liked the idea of holding an actual book in their hands. So
I never gave in.
and so,
I read through the book.
but that's an interesting aspect to take a look at, because when you really understand that, that's to say, everybody predicted the death of bookstores. I mean, you saw Borders go away, you saw Barnes & Noble close bookstore after bookstore, and now all of a sudden everybody's saying, well, wait a minute, maybe there is a place for books in the market. I don't think it's going to look like it did before. You're not going to see large bookstores, but you're going to see some element of bookstores probably still in the market. And I think that's a really important thing to understand about online shopping, is that it's shifting as well. It is not as predictive as we would maybe like it to be in the industry. And so, where maybe we're buying all of our electronics online, maybe that bounces back and there's a need still for electronic stores or electronic retailing. There's no way to deny it though. Online is perceived to be more convenient and a better value. There is a perception because they're not paying that sales tax. And that there's the ability to cross-shop a certain item. You can cross-shop, you know, multiple retailers within a couple clicks of your mouse, that you can get a better value than you would be if you went to the store. So this is obviously one of the factors creating a dynamic shift in retailing. Introducing experience into shopping. So how do retailers draw customers away from their computers? If it's more cost efficient and more time efficient to be shopping online, how do I get you away? And really this is where we're taking a cue from consumers wanting more experiences. Maybe this isn't exactly what they told us they want to take a trip, but the whole idea is that if the idea of experience is going to be more important, then the retailing industry needs to focus on the concept of experience to excite customers. So the way I get you away from your computer is I get you into a shopping experience that has experience. And that can mean many things. I mean, I showed some pictures because what is experience to you may not be experience to you. And what attracts you and draws you away from your computer and into a store can be a very tough to be able to pin down. And what you really find is that these are evolving concepts, and you're going to see retailers really try things, and if consumers are not resonating with it, you're going to see them abandon it quickly and move on to something else. So the crystal ball says, it's about as murky as it's ever been in my history of doing retailing, but there's going to be seismic shifts in retailing. I don't know that there's any one expert that's going to tell you what those are going to look like, but you can count on the fact that it's shifting. These are shifting sands for bricks and mortar retailers. I don't think anybody feels sure-footed. If you are a bricks and mortar retailer, you are looking for ways to broaden your retailing exposure. It may be that you're going to start offering online components, or you're going to be creating opportunities for your consumers to stand in your store with your phone. The phone is another component that's really changed the face of retailing, because you can now stand in an aisle and you can price compare right as you stand there looking at something. I did that just the other day. And there's less definition in the retailing genres. So, you know, once retail sat in very distinct genres, and now that things are kind of all moving around, some bigger stores are getting smaller, some smaller guys are trying to get bigger. They're changing the way that they look at their consumer. I don't think that retail is going to fit as neatly into the boxes as it used to do. So I went and recapped, and in my study I looked at the retail demand numbers that were produced by Rickard Cunningham, both by category and by development area. So I'm going to go through as it was done in the report. So furniture and home furnishings, this is a category, and again, all the categories from Rickard Cunningham are all NAICS categories, or codes that are how the town actually collects sales tax revenue. So, you know, this is kind of a deceiving category. On one hand, it shows that there is, on a 10-year demand, over 34,000 square feet of available building. When you look at what happens in terms of furniture and home furnishings, though, national scale furniture retailers cluster. This is a real comparison shop. Most times you're going to not just go to one specific furniture store, you're looking to go to several as you're looking for particular items. So the idea that they need to be clustered and that they're larger in scale doesn't lend well to what we have in terms of capacity. More than likely, we're going to meet the need for this by an independent furniture retailer, somebody like a Concepts that sits out of Longmont and Boulder. You know, somebody who has perhaps a regional influence and is willing to go on a freestanding or standalone basis, or from a general merchandise retailer. So,
You know, they started in Greeley.
yeah. So
They had a store in Greeley for years.
So, you know, the general merchandise, yeah, they were over by the old Safeway in Bittersweet, yeah. So the general merchandise retailer, you know, they will sell things, if they sell a desk or they sell, you know, any kind of a bookshelf, I mean, it does fit within this category, and so a general merchandise retailer could fill some of the gap, or capacity that was shown for demand in furniture and home furnishings. Electronics and appliance. Well, this is a.
Can I go back to the last one?
Yeah.
I know that you're mostly talking about national or bigger, but is like a niche, like antique furniture qualify in that? Because that seems to be one that's pretty popular now. So if you were able to build like, we have a successful antique store downtown.
Right.
Seems to be pretty successful, so.
I think I think if you can expand that presence, I don't know that
Yeah.
it would meet entirely the need or
Right,
in
I
terms of how
understand.
this gap
Right.
was
Right,
developed.
but it is part of that.
It is part of that. You know, if somebody, and I gave you examples of pictures of things that are much more
Mhm.
eclectic
Right.
and independent
Right,
than an American Furniture or a Furniture Row or somebody along those capacities. Because I do think that's where you would find that you would fill capacity from.
right.
That type of retailer. Retail demand by, so electronics and appliances. So this one's kind of a challenging category because really, the industry leader in this is Best Buy. And as we know, Best Buy sits down in Promenade. They're the leading retailer for electronics, followed by Amazon and then Walmart. So, you know, the challenge with really filling this capacity component for, and when you look at this, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling around tonight. I started with a cold and I took too much cold medicine, so I apologize right up front. You know, when you look at a 10-year demand number of 75,000 square feet, I gotta be honest with you, you would say I should be able to get an electronics store, right? The problem with that is that, you know, the guys who really fit into that category are few and far between, and really at this point in time, it's really somebody like Best Buy, and then when we get into the appliances, it's really Sears or Lowe's. And I don't see Sears coming to the town of Windsor in any market, anywhere do I see Sears really expanding their presence. And so when we look at the competitive influences that impact this category is that, you know, we're served by everybody around us, and in and of ourselves, we don't have enough capacity to have a secondary store or have a standalone store that would service just the Windsor marketplace. So even at 75,000 square feet, you know, that's not enough to support a Home Depot or a Lowe's who does do the primary appliance sales. And with Best Buy really being the only industry target for electronics, it's, you know, unless we're going to lure them out of Promenade, which I think there's a possibility of that, depending on 392 and I-25, that's the only location, and the type of development that would happen there, if that was a more attractive opportunity than perhaps their positioning in Promenade is, we might have an opportunity to lure them out. But that would really be the highest opportunity to land Best Buy. They're not gonna come and build another store.
Would they want a smaller footprint likely? Would that be part of their strategy?
Yeah, their strategy is smaller footprints, and I think the store in Promenade, I don't believe for them is as high profile as they would like it to be. So perhaps an opportunity to be in a more modern and more interesting shopping environment may be attractive to them. So
What about Cons, who's moving into the Denver market?
Cons likes,
There's one here.
Cons likes low demographics because most of their money is done in financing. So the challenge with Cons is that our demographics are too high for Cons. So they're looking for areas where somebody needs to come in and get a loan to buy that washer or dryer or to buy that TV.
Because I know they just went into Arvada and they're moving in, and they just moved into Thornton as well. So.
Yeah, and if you'll know where they went in Thornton, they went off of, in the old Walmart off of 104th and Grant on the south end of town, which is the lower demographic, and the store in Arvada is not performing because demographics were not quite the match for them. How's that? So, you know, and they have a bookend store called H.H. Gregg, and, you know, they were looking to come into the market at the same time Cons was, and they actually opted out of the Denver market, feeling that we were not demographically a good profile for them.
What about like a Sears Grand? I know you said no to Sears, but Costco's down there in Thornton, you know, at Highway 7 and I-25, and then they just built the Costco up here, and it, you know, I mean, people that had Costco memberships here went all the way down to that Costco.
So that's the only Sears Grand in the entire country. And it's actually for sale quite
There we go,
quietly.
alright.
I think when you look at Sears right now, Sears is not so much a retailer as they are a real estate play. They really have positioned themselves from a real estate perspective and not from a retailing perspective. You know, they're also Kmart, and you know, the Kmarts are closing, and many of the Sears are closing, and so I don't think as a chain perspective, and they're slipping when you look at electronic sales, I mean, Lowe's is really coming up hard on top of them. So I think if we, to me, the best, a general merchandiser, this would be the other thing I'm talking about is Super Walmart Impact would certainly have, especially on the electronic side, would have a huge ability to impact the leakage that's currently happening on one part of the category. Appliances is gonna be a different conversation. I mean, I think you're still gonna see people flow out to Lowe's more than likely outside of our trade area in terms to be able to fulfill that. Has anybody bought appliances here in the last, where'd you go?
Manweiler.
Manweiler.
So, yeah. So, you do have the ability to capture some with what you have, but the ability to really impact this category is gonna come from Super Walmart. Building materials, and this kind of relates a little bit, and garden equipment, at 29,000 square feet, we're not even close to being able to support, a Menards, a Home Depot, a Lowe's, really, at 29,000 square feet for 10-year demand. I mean, we're really talking about, the sister to Ace, which would be True Value, in that category. So, this is kind of one of those things where I think you have a really nice complement with Ace and Manweiler, and I don't know that, strong efforts to try and introduce another competitor into this would actually help your gap that much, and would it potentially impact the viability of your existing retailers. So, in terms of this one, I mean, at 10,000 square feet, when you look at something as big as building materials and garden equipment, you really don't have a lot of leakage. This is not a great big number. And I suspect that, what does leak out of here is things that you couldn't buy even if we brought in another smaller scale hardware type of home improvement store. Though, you're just gonna get, if you've gotta buy a certain level of tools or lumber or things like that, you're still gonna flow out to one of the larger home improvement stores. Food and beverage. So what was interesting to me about this is that, needed to recapture leakage was 0. So what that tells me is that you have, in terms of grocery retailing, beer and wine, you have the appropriate amount of square footage. Whether you like what the options are as much may be more challenging, and that certainly plays into the restaurant conversation a little bit later on. I do think at 54,000 square feet in a 10-year, we definitely have the opportunity to add perhaps that more attractive grocery store, that less conventional or less traditional. I will tell you, out of all the categories, this is probably one of the most chaotic. There was rumors that Kroger was buying Whole Foods. That may not be a rumor, it may be a rumor. I think there are a tremendous amount of retailers in this category, and we as consumers are not eating more food. So somewhere along the line, it feels to me like retraction needs to happen. We just can't have as many people who are out there trying to do food when we as consumers don't need to have. It's not one of those things where you can have 20 books, but you're still going to only eat 5 bananas in the week. So this is just not a category that grows because there are more options for you in terms of food.
Katie,
So
a couple times a year I get surveys from King Soopers. One of the questions is, if there was another store in Windsor, would you still shop at? If there was another grocer in Windsor, would you still shop at King Soopers? What's behind that?
you mean they're asking that question?
Yeah, they've asked that
I think they're
several
just,
times this year.
they, like everybody else in this category and almost all of retailing, is trying to figure out what's next.
Okay.
Their new stores are 123,000 square feet, and it's a question mark. I think it's a question mark whether or not 123,000 square foot grocery store is gonna resonate with a new consumer who can buy most of their non-perishables online. And once you get more used to that,
Yeah.
do I need 123,000 square foot grocery store? So I see them evolving just like every other retailer right now, trying to figure out how do we make ourselves most attractive to the consumer. And to not think that online shopping is impacting grocery would be a misconception. It is definitely impacting this category. And like I said, when I don't know if you've seen how Amazon works. If you have their system, you can just what's her name? I can't think of her name off the top of my head.
You push the buttons.
Alexa, yeah, I mean, you've seen the commercials, I mean, it's like, Alexa, can you know, reorder paper towels for me? Well, when you can get accustomed to that as a shopper and don't feel like you have to get into the store to make those kind of product choices for grocery. I mean, grocery, for most people's a bit of a chore. It's not necessarily an enjoyable experience. And so I think two things have to happen. I think the grocers have to evolve to have a better experience, and you'll be shocked to find out Walmart is testing in Arkansas the idea of doing more of a food court in their supercenters, and introducing more regional type of restaurants in there instead of the Subway, McDonald's that you see in everyone. Because they're understanding that to get you into that store, they need to have more attractive offerings. So I think you're just gonna, I think this industry more than any other is gonna really impact, the number of retailers that are out there doing grocery and the way that we do grocery. And I think King's is trying to stay ahead of that and understand what, as consumers, are you looking for. I think if we have another grocery store, assuming Super Walmart does not come into this market and bring a large scale grocery presence, I think there's definitely capacity at maturity to do a store out maybe on the east end of town. That's what really feels like the right location for me. And maybe the opportunity to bring something that's a little bit different than the conventional, or whatever, 10 years from now would be a really long time in understanding what you would want to, what grocery may look like. But at that point in time, you would have the opportunity to attract the best and the brightest potentially.
Something that's different,
Yeah.
different type of food than what you would buy at.
And like I said, I don't think Kroger will look the same in 10 years. I don't think Safeway's gonna look the same in 10 years. I don't know what Sprouts is gonna look like in 10 years. Whole Foods very well may be Kroger in the next 3 years. So, I mean, when you think about that kind of evolutionary aspect to something like grocery, it makes it impossible for us to plan accordingly, other than to say we need to reserve the ability to develop that in the area that it wants to go in. So if the idea of having future grocery options on the east end of town is attractive, then we need to be careful about how we plan for those areas so that we don't lose the opportunity to bring grocery in, whatever it looks like in the next decade.
How about like a Sprouts like they built in Loveland over there at Eisenhower?
I mean, Sprouts is 25,000 square feet. They do I think they're a little more online proof, because their real focus in grocery retailing has to do more with perishables. And there's still an aspect, I think, as a shopper where we like to pick our own bananas and apples and meat and things like that. And so I think that they are representative of where grocery retailing is starting to evolve too. So I don't feel like they're behind the times. Where if you look at some of the more old school traditional retailers, I feel like they're not evolving yet. And I buy online, and I actually use delivery. So, there's definitely a changing factor, and it's rare I have a list in a grocery cart and I go spend an hour grocery shopping anymore. So, I think, what's interesting about that, I'm not 28, I'm a long ways from 28. So, the fact that I'm comfortable doing that and will make those choices really starts to speak to how this is starting to evolve and its impact ultimately on the retailers that are in that category. Health and personal care, this is kind of an interesting, the category itself is dominated by drugstore chains. Even though there's a 10-year future demand of 52,000, almost 400 square feet, we're still going to be talking about drugstores. So, obviously, Walmarts and Targets do factor into this. You do have Ulta. Ulta tends to be a mall or more of a higher profile regional retailing aspect. And obviously Super Walmart would have a huge impact on this. So I think, as a category, it makes it tough to go out and say, well, we can target certain retailers in this category, because right now the category offerings, from a retailing perspective, I don't think are broad enough for us to make a significant impact into the category. There, see, I'm starting to hit my stride now. Thank you for bearing with me and my cold medicine. Clothing and accessories. So this one, we'd probably talk a lot about this one, and I know that this is a high-profile question from the town board. Obviously, when we look at this, we would have capacity now at almost 54,000 square feet. I mean, that would be a Ross and a TJ Maxx, or it would be a Steinmart, or it would be, or it's Kohl's. The challenge for us with this is that the fashion presence is really heavy in Loveland and Fort Collins. And so the retailers that fit within this category are very well represented in both of those marketplaces. So the idea that we could do some of these retailers as standalones is probably not realistic. If you ask me where I think that we would really find the opportunity to make impact into this category, it's really gonna be in the non-mall department stores, such as a Bon-Ton, a Belk's, or a Kohl's. Now, Bon-Ton and Belk are not here in Colorado. They've circled Colorado and they've had conversation about coming to Colorado, but in this current environment, they're not actually seeking opportunity. Kohl's, if you're tracking Kohl's, you'll know that Kohl's is having some financial issues as well. Their sales have been sliding. Matter of fact, their real estate department's been reduced down to one individual. That's never a good sign. So that doesn't mean that that's where they stay. That may be just indicative of where we're at in the market cycle and that they just need to reinvent themselves slightly. If you do some reading about Kohl's, it's really not a factor of that, an idea that their concept is incorrect, is that they've had some misses on the merchandise side, that they've carried some brands and some lines of clothing that just didn't resonate, and so perhaps they have a chance to right the ship. So, we haven't seen them closing stores, we just have seen them kind of stop dead in the water right now and kind of reconfigure who they are. I will tell you, a couple years ago, they looked very heavily at Highway 392 and I-25. I think there was very serious interest on their part, so I think the opportunity to potentially do a project that they would be included in is certainly an opportunity. Certainly it has a chance. And obviously Super Walmart will have an impact, but not to something like Kohl's. I mean, if we were able to attract Kohl's, I don't think a Super Walmart being placed here in the town would detract from that. I think they would still be interested in that. Sporting goods, hobby, book, and music. So this one is like a crapshoot to me. This is like one of the most confused categories I've ever seen. It was kind of like we had a whole bunch of stuff left over and we're going to throw it in here. Because, the challenge from somebody like Stacy and mine's perspective is that each of these are individual categories from a retailing perspective. So to throw them all in there and lump them in and say, in 10 years you've got almost 20,500 square feet available, well, in what? And is it in sporting goods, is it in books, or is it in music? So really we'd have to get a lot more in depth into this category to really understand what the capacity is. It's just too broad, and there's too many specific retailers that fit within this category for me to really give you what a target would be. And then, Super Walmart definitely would have some impact on this. They would impact every single one of those potential categories, and so they may very easily absorb up what would be 20,000 square feet of retailing. Okay, so general merchandise, this is what we all know general merchandise to be. This is Target and this is Walmart. And I did key in a lot on Super Walmart, and the reason being is they own a site in town. So, there should be some expectation, if given the right numbers, that they would eventually are going to build a store. What this tells me is at 124,500, we're getting pretty close. We're not quite there. If their stores are going to be now 180, but up, maybe approximating up over 200,000 for the Super Walmart, we're starting to get closer. I don't know that we're 10 years out with this. I think we're probably closer than that, but we may not be only 1 year out. We may be a little bit further than that when we look at what the capacity is for that. But expectations. When we look at what's going on with Target in this category, Target has been very slow to return to construction in North America. After spending a lot of time and capital to expand into Canada and then having to shut all of those stores down, they too, just like all the other retailers, it's like, what's next? They have a new CEO. He has said that he's looking at a recommitment to grocery, which is interesting because Target was making a move away from grocery. So, what do they look like in the next evolution? I don't know that they know, so that we know. Like I said with Super Walmart, I think there's encouraging things to say that they are actually looking at trying to evolve the super centers, and I think that's a positive thing for consumers, because you can't just be value, you have to also have some attractiveness to your shopping experience. And so right now, to me, they're all value and no experience, and I think they're gonna have to bridge that for them to be a more successful retailer. That's a personal opinion. The other guys who fit into this category are dollar stores, and I'm happy to talk about dollar stores, but to be honest with you, to me, they're like a convenience store that sells gasoline. They're gonna come in spite of themselves. I don't think there's anything that we ought to be out there doing to encourage more dollar stores in town. If anybody disagrees with that, let me know. Then quickly, food service and drinking places. Really what this shows me is that currently, with only 6,000 square feet in capacity, this is really a question of capacity versus preference. I think you have enough drinking and food service retailers in town. I just don't think they're the ones that you like, all of them. How's that? There's probably some you really like and probably some you don't. I think, since this is really kind of the touchstone for the entertainment perspective or, experience perspective, I think that we're gonna see evolution with this as well. And I think when we get further in and I start talking about creating different kinds of development areas, you'll start to see the types of restaurants and drinking establishments come in when the opportunities are right. So now we're gonna talk about category, and I know I'm trying to move fast here. So I-25 and 392, this is a bullseye location. This is it. If we really were gonna get retail, Walmart notwithstanding, if we're gonna get retail that has some stature to it, this is where it's gonna come. The ability to be on the interstate and on an east-west connector that has legs, which is what we talk about in the industry, is unparalleled for any other site in the town of Windsor. So if we're going to get retail that has some substance, it's gonna be here. There are certainly competitive influences. We sit right between Fort Collins and Loveland. Loveland's retailing presence, which is right up on the interstate as well, and Fort Collins, which are just a little bit off. I really think one of the factors that could be key in this is how this is designed. I think if we could take this area and make it representative of where retailing wants to go. So, let's not stand on design principles from 20 years ago. Let's go and start looking at integrated uses, high density residential, entertainment elements that are involved with it, integrated retail. So not just retail that sits outside, I always make the joke that anything can be mixed use if you just draw the circle big enough. This is where I really think you have to use some creativity and really look at what is going to be on the cutting edge of retail design and start to embrace that, rather than looking at what has been. And I think if that gives this site the chance to really lure some retail out of the neighboring municipalities. Now, whether that's an objective of yours or not, I'm not going to say, but I would say it would give you the chance to have a high profile, up-to-date and more modern approach to retailing. It's funny, I had this conversation with Kelly last week. My sincere opinion is that by the time Shields gets open in Loveland, it will already be an outdated retailing concept. I think that as we look at where retailing is moving to, it is not boxes just lined up in a parking field in front. I don't think that resonates with these changed perspectives for the consumers, and that we have to get to a place where we're looking at things that are totally different than before. Now, there's no blueprint for that. There's not even necessarily a model for that. I think it's an evolutionary process as you work with the landowner and the people the uses that want to be part of it. But I can't stress with you enough that if you have to get out of the box here to achieve what you want to do, and you can't rely on very outdated retailing concepts.
How does the brands affect? I feel like that's what they're gonna do. Are they ahead of us on this?
Yeah.
And no.
Well, they're certainly out there trying to market their perspective. They don't have as strong a site as this is. and they're missing the interstate frontage, and I think that's a huge miss when you really get down. Retailers are evolving and trying to figure out and move forward and do things differently, but they're not going to give up everything that they've ever known in terms of retailing. And one of those things is that an interstate has the ability to deliver a phenomenal amount of customers to your site, and in an era where there's a lot of risk because we don't know what's next. There are still some perspectives that are gonna be positively viewed, and that's being on the I-25 corridor. Because I can deliver you down from Cheyenne, and it's not that the brands at the ranch can't still do that, but there is still that perspective, out of sight, out of mind. And even though you have a more dynamic and interesting development, if you're on the interstate, how many people are driving by you every single day going, oh yeah, I wanna stop there, I wanna stop there. And I think that's a real challenge for the brands at the ranch to be off the interstate.
Still have plenty of visibility with signage and.
It's still,
That's
yeah, and maybe that evolves over the next 10-year period and retailers care less about that, but I will tell you today, and he's trying to market that project today, my sources when I went digging on that particular project is that there's not a lot of traction going on.
Yeah, my concern is they'll beat us to the punch, not knowing what we're.
The retailers have to respond. And so I don't know that he's getting the retailer response that he's
Okay.
hoping to have yet, so I think there's still time.
You think it's because of the location? Crossroads on I-25?
Well, it's not Crossroads and I-25, because
It's all across from you.
you're off the I-25.
And you're on
Crossroads
Crossroads.
Fifth.
Yep.
County Road 5.
Believe me, it makes a huge difference. So, so State Highway 392, Well County Road 15. This is a very established retailing area. It's for all practical purposes, you're just putting pieces in. It's very well defined. It's a community retail area. This is not where you're really gonna see a lot of regional retail come in. If the Walmart Supercenter is coming in, it's to serve Windsor. It's not to serve, outside of that, not with their stores to the north and to the south. It has limitations in growth because it is very well defined and very well, and then the changing aspect of grocery retailing, what does that mean? Safeway's going to reposition themselves, what does that mean? King Soopers, what does that mean? This is defined, but it's also in an evolutionary period because, it is what it is in terms of community retailing, but what does the future of community retailing look like? And we want to be careful that we're starting to have an eye towards that and not what once was, which was a bunch of pads and a grocery in the back with parking, and how do we have public spaces, public interaction, part of its architecture, part of its, planning for common areas. So, this area has the ability to evolve as well, and how that looks would just really is going to be something that has to take some participation from the ownership and some of the current retailing that's out there.
Can I ask you a question about Safeway?
Yeah.
We know from the sales tax numbers that Safeway does 1/3 the amount of business that King Soopers does. Is there any, and I personally, before I was on the board, was surprised that Safeway's been around in Windsor as long as they have, with as dead as it seems to be.
I built that store a long time ago.
Right. Is there a way for a municipality or a developer or something to come in and say, you know what, this isn't working, it's time to look at departing, and we'd like to get a different tenant in there or something like that? Is there any way to?
No. And the challenge with that is you can, if they leave.
I'm trying to figure out the way to say that, but
The challenge is if they shut their doors, you can't necessarily control what goes into it. It can be a church, it can sit closed for a really long time. And you gotta give Safeway a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. They were combined with Albertsons, they were bought by Cerebus, and so now they're if you noticed last week, they rebranded the last few remaining Albertsons to Safeways, and they actually closed a couple more stores, so they're weeding out and getting rid of the non-performers. And I think that the next step for them is really kind of trying to decide what their brand's gonna be. I don't think if you go to that store today it's representative of anything about what they're planning to do in the future. So, I think they're in an interesting time for them, because I think to survive as a chain, they have to evolve more so than anybody. And what that looks like, they're not sharing. I don't know that the market really understands what they're gonna look like, other than to say, let's see what they look like in a couple of years' time.
Is there any way to know what the Windsor location does compared to other Safeways?
Sure.
I mean, I just
We're
didn't know.
really short on time, so maybe we
Yeah.
can we'll come back and maybe have a topic about that, or, sorry.
Yeah.
I just know that we've got another, item on the.
Okay.
too, so.
So 392 and 257, this is where I think you get the chance to do something really cool down the road. It's got kind of a nice appeal to it. It's kind of an interesting intersection. I think as the residential maturity starts to fill in around there and it starts to come in, it has the ability to be a good community retail area of the future. It also has convenience retail. Obviously, I think there's some developers out there right now. And I showed you some pictures. That one in the middle, that's a 7-Eleven. So when we start talking about evolution, it's all the way down to the convenience level. The good food store, that's kind of a local grocery. You're starting to see some of these guys really try and step their game up and do something that isn't the norm from what we've seen. And I think it's important that you require that you don't just let a bunch of convenience retail go in there, because if you do that, then the ability to have this intersection be representative for you down the road will be limited. So this is one of those areas where I think you have to maintain the future and be a little bit forward thinking about what the future may look like, and then hold out criteria for that. And then Crossroads and County Road, you're in the shadow of the brands at the ranch. You just are. It just is what it is. I think it's important that you match the level of design for the area. And I gotta be honest with you, I don't know what 4 million square feet of retail looks like. And so when I look at a capacity for 4 million square feet of retail, that's an extraordinary number to me. I don't think the area will ever support that level of retail in today's, in the growing and changing environment. But I do think that there is certainly an area of focus for retail out there, and done in such a way that Windsor needs to very much match. And this has the ability, tying into your other projects out there, to be a really interesting entertainment area, which retail will have some influence with. But I think it really comes down to design, which will help dictate what this future, this opportunity area looks like going down the road. So that was really quick. That's a lot of stuff in a quick period of time, and I probably took more time than I was supposed to, since you guys have got to be done.
So what happens next?
Did I miss one? I did, sorry. Okay, summary. So changing retail landscape makes retail recruitment much more difficult, okay? It's really hard right now, because the retailers themselves don't know what they want, so it's hard for us to say you should be this. Getting ahead of retail trends will be necessary. I think if I made any point tonight, and any point in this, it's that you have to start thinking down the road and not what once was. I think you have to throw out the window any idea of what a grocery anchored shopping center looks like, what a power center shopping center looks like, even what a regional mall looks like, and start thinking about what's going to be attractive going forward, what's going to still be current in 2025 and not be already outdated like it is potentially here in 2016. So, strategic planning is more important than at any other time from a town's perspective. And then lastly, you've got to be nimble and open-minded. I would counsel you to not reject any idea at this point. I would really sit down and take a look at anything that comes down and just say, how does that fit into what we think we want to be going forward?
Even auto dealerships?
Even auto dealerships, I guess, have done in such a way that they were part of something greater, than maybe, I'm having a hard time, but maybe. So next step is really strategic planning. You gotta have prioritization of the development and redevelopment areas, and I threw in redevelopment areas because really we're gonna be talking about, the only thing, what I find most intriguing is the Main Street is the most stable retailing concept Once was is now very hip and cool again. And so when we look at the areas around Safeway and King Soopers, we have to start thinking about what does redevelopment of that area look like. And I'm working on that in the town of Centennial right now, and we're taking 1980s versions of shopping centers and we're actually we're looking at the opportunity of eliminating retail square footage and replacing it with different uses to kind of become more representative of where we think things are gonna go. Comprehensive outline of needed actions. So we need to really understand how to best position each opportunity area for future retail. So this is where you don't get, an Arby's and a 7-Eleven and then lose the opportunity to do a community retailing area. Or a car dealership and lose the ability to do, high density integrated mixed use out at the interchange. Identification of target retailers where appropriate. I mean, not every retailer is sitting on their hands. So, as we prioritize and become strategic about each of these areas, I think there will be some retailers that we certainly think are gonna be a good match and can be targeted and tried to be recruited, even in this, time period that we're in. Interaction with property owners and developers, you gotta educate them. I'm not gonna tell you that everybody's on the train right now, and they need to get on the train. So you gotta interact with them and help bring them up to speed. Interaction with the retailing community, this is where you get to show and shine yourself as being progressive and forward thinking and help them understand that you're creating a community that has these elements that are gonna be both attractive to the new consumer and the people who wanna live here as well and want retailing that is representative of that. And then active marketing, you gotta be out there pushing this stuff forward and talking about it and setting the seeds and really getting ahead of maybe things that might be in the competitive jurisdictions around you. Oh, and then lastly, I thought this was fun. So you'll be happy to know I'm no longer be spending all my time shopping online, she's discovered. And I think it's important because even though we're really reactive to some of the things that are going on right now, there's gonna be bounce back. And so, I would tell you, I put in the report that retail reinvents itself about every 50 years, and we're there. And it's both, to me, it's a really exciting and creative time because you can really be at the forefront of doing some really kind of cool things, but you gotta be progressive and open to some really different ideas in order to accomplish that. Cool, sorry, I left you guys with like 7 minutes.
So I think what we're looking for is some kind of direction and approval to move forward with the third phase, which may incorporate additional expenditures. We don't know yet, but for Katie's perspective of the last and final phase of that $7,500, it's really kind of looking at a shift from just going out and getting the retailers. It's identifying those key sites within Windsor that we really want to focus on. What does that look with meeting with developers and then potentially matching up? I don't want to misspeak, but then potentially matching up those retailers that are in the market that will come to those specific areas of Windsor. So I think we're looking at potentially a strategic plan that we could put into place and start working on, hopefully as quickly getting something going, a strategic plan by the end of this year, and then hitting it in 2017 and moving forward with like an 18-month to 2-year plan of how do we start integrating these areas and these specific nodes within Windsor, and developing those relationships and starting getting some of those going.
Would there be a strategic plan in essence for each little retail node? Is that what we're...
Yeah, because they're so
some
different.
redevelopment and some new development?
Yeah, you really have to look at, when you get out to some of the, I-25 at 392, there's some established, but really it's big growth components, so you really gotta start setting the stage and working with the property owners out there so that they can understand, where the town's trying to go with this. And that's not without its challenges. And then, you get around King Soopers and Safeway, and you gotta start trying to figure out, how do you reimagine this a little bit, if this is, and that actually becomes more difficult, just because you're dealing with so much built environment. And I think, if you asked me my personal opinion or professional opinion, we will see less square footage built in retail. There will be a need for less square footage. So, this concept of that we may have too much retailing infrastructure. We may have too much, and so if that's the case, what needs to go, and how does it get repositioned, and where do we really wanna concentrate our efforts and really kind of create kind of a more nodal perspective from retail instead of kind of the elongated, retail perspective that's current in that area that's already established, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know we're really short on time, and I apologize, Dean and Vicki,
Sure.
for having you in here. But I even had a question on this when when you read through this, as I was reading through it last night, it's kind of negative. I mean, there's a lot of negatives in here about like, we'll probably never get this because, you know, of that. And so I guess my question is, how feasible is it to even go down this path if we already understand and know, you know, some of these things that we're never gonna get, or, you know, we don't have very good chances of ever attracting because of positions already in the place. So, you know, how, I mean, I guess what I was trying to think is, how good is going through this next phase, you know, how useful of a tool is that gonna be for us? Or for you, I guess.
Well, and I asked Katie, how's it feel to be the contrary in the room? But I think, there's a couple of aspects, answer to your question is, really, I think there's gonna be some policy discussions you need to have also with landowners, and partnerships built. It may not give you a definite answer what may be coming towards us, but what is it you want it to look like? What is it you are willing to help? So for instance, we know Mr. Ruff on 392 and 257 corner, is very interested in some redevelopment area, and we've been helping on that, but it was interesting, Katie said, if there's something you want in there as part of your incentive package, you ought to be thinking about that, is if there's something there. And so there's carrots you can also be talking about, and how to help property owners bring along the vision you think you want for areas, but also working with them, listen to their vision, and partner up with them, and that's like Mr. Moreland. What's the long-term plan on that land? That's a conversation we need to have with him or somebody about the future. And so it may not bring something to the table immediately. It may not be going out and finding, you know, the next great retailer, 2 or 3, but it is certainly starting to build a unified effort with a group of people who are going to be very influential to us in our future of our retail. And then if something happens, we're prepared or ready to have that conversation, a partnership built, so when they walk in the door, or when something knocks on the door, or they are successful, we already know the answer. Yes, that can be here, or we can modify it.
Or not,
Yeah,
because like,
right.
as we learned, as we spent 2.5 years creating
Exactly.
criteria and design standards for I-25 and 392, only for our very first prospective who came in, who made us spend another 18 months re-changing the criteria conditions because it was different.
Right.
And so, you know, I mean, I think we've gone this far, I'm certainly in favor, but I guess I just wanna make sure, you know, I guess I'm just making sure that we're all aware that what we create still
Yeah.
might not be
Yep.
everything
And
to.
there's a couple of couple directed conversations still to be had, so that Safeway area, I think we need to have a directed conversation and hopefully a plan. What is Walmart, what's our interest, or not, soon in the future sometime. I know that Katie says they own the property, well, let's talk about that, what does that mean? And how does that work and when? And
I mean, I think if you looked at one retailer who could impact your sales tax revenue leakage the most, and I told Kelly, it depends on what your goal is. But if your goal is to limit sales tax leakage, you have that person right in front of you, that's Super Walmart. And so the challenge becomes working with them to get them perhaps here earlier than the market. I mean, you're on the cusp. So, I mean, you know, it's not that you're never gonna get Super Walmart, I think it's more like, when are you gonna get Super Walmart?
But, and are we moving into a phase where we have got to have some kind of incentive package for every single person moving forward that we now want to come into our community?
Or target our incentive guidelines.
So
I think
For what?
it's tied in, it could be tied in with your areas of interest.
Incentives are the norm. It is every day now. Every retailer, every developer, every project, I don't care if you're 7-Eleven, McDonald's, or your Super Walmart, all of them have some expectation of incentives. Does every project should be incented? Absolutely not. And how much do you play is really indicative about how much of a target it is and how much it impacts potentially the financial status of the town. I mean, you know, those are, and there's no two retailers are gonna be the same. You can't do a policy because nobody will fit into the box. As soon as you do it, you'll get the first one that doesn't fit. So you have to be nimble, and you have to take each one that comes along. You know, if you had Steubens that came up here out of downtown Denver and said, you know, we did so well in Arvada, we're gonna wanna do one up here in Windsor. Well, you might look at that as an eating establishment that you're like, we want that. That's cool, that's hip, that's exactly what we want. We might incent that. Where if Applebee's came, you would say, no, thank you. So, I mean, it just depends on, you know, each individual opportunity and what their needs are, what's causing the need for incentives. But I will tell you, across the board, incentives are big. And the bigger the project, the bigger the incentive.
So I challenged Stacy and Katie that we've locked in a December work session on incentives. I've asked that we come back with an outline of what we're gonna do with this at that time.
So we can have further
Yeah,
discussion before
further-
they really dive into it.
I wanna see kind of a timeline, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do this, kind of, so, they have about 45 days to figure that out. But I think it's gonna be helpful, and there's gonna be, you know, are we gonna do it by region, or are we gonna do it by what? I think it's gonna be by those targeted areas, and talk about what are the steps, who are we gonna meet with, when, what are the policy decisions that need to be made, when, all those things. And so, the journey is just starting. But I hope by the end of December, you're gonna see the path through the journey, and start getting a feel of that question there.
This reminds me of when we said we're gonna go to the moon, and we had no idea how to do it.
Yeah,
But this is different, because
Okay.
we knew what the moon looked like.
yeah.
So we don't really have to make a
know what
decision, because
No.
we're seeing something again in December.
Right, right. Madam Mayor, I was gonna say that I know that we're running late. If you have stuff on the budget, staff is here that's ready for that tonight. We talked about doing that during the communications piece tonight, so I don't want you to forget. So if you would like to, if you have something, we can do it then, or if you wanna reschedule, but let's get back down to communications and see where we are on that topic.
Okay.
So I think we're done with the work session, Frank, you can do the meeting.